Billionaire woman goes undercover as poor to find true love. Little did she know who she would fall for. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The red Honda Civic sputtered to a complete stop on Route 40, steam billowing from under the hood like a distress signal. Victoria Hamilton, now Maggie Sullivan according to the carefully forged documents in her purse, sat behind the wheel watching her disguise nearly unravel before it even began. The Tennessee sun beat down mercilessly as she stepped out, her designer heels immediately sinking into the gravel shoulder. A pickup truck slowed, then pulled over behind her. The driver climbed out slowly, wiping his hands on an oil-stained cloth. Jake Morrison approached cautiously, taking in her expensive watch and perfectly manicured nails. "Thanks for stopping. Not many folks would help a stranger these days." "Well, shoot." Jake's voice carried the unhurried drawl of someone who'd learned to take life one careful step at a time. "Your radiator's completely shot. Steam like that means you're not going anywhere soon." His dark hair was streaked with premature silver, and his brown eyes held a wariness that spoke of old pain. Despite his suspicious glance at her outfit, he popped her hood without being asked. "I'm new around here. Name's Maggie Sullivan." She tried to make her voice sound less polished, less like someone who'd attended Swiss finishing schools. Jake Morrison. He didn't offer his hand, busy examining the engine. "You're lucky this happened near town, instead of out in the middle of nowhere. Where you headed, Miss Sullivan?" She'd rehearsed this answer. "Just Maggie, please. Well, I'm looking for a fresh start, I suppose. Heard Millbrook was a nice, quiet place." Jake straightened up, his expression softening slightly. "Fresh starts. Yeah, I understand that." He glanced at her again, noting the contradiction between her expensive clothes and nervous energy. "You got someone you can call?" The question hung in the air. Victoria Hamilton had a dozen assistants she could summon with a phone call. Maggie Sullivan had nobody. "Not really. I was hoping to find somewhere to stay in town while I get settled." She gestured helplessly at the smoking car. "Guess I'll need a mechanic, too." Jake pulled out his phone. "I'll call Murphy's tow service. They're honest folks. Won't overcharge you. As for a place to stay..." He paused, studying her face. "There's Paradise Pines Trailer Park just outside town. Ruth Washington runs it. She's good people. A trailer park. Victoria had never seen one except in movies. That sounds perfect, actually." Jake's eyebrows rose slightly. Most folks don't use the word perfect when talking about trailer parks. Maggie felt her cheeks warm. "I just meant it sounds like exactly what I need. Simple, affordable, real. Jake repeated the word quietly, as if testing whether she meant it. "Well, Murphy should be here in about 20 minutes. You want me to give Ruth a call? Let her know you might be coming by. You'd do that for a complete stranger." For the first time, Jake almost smiled. "Millbrook's not Nashville, Miss Maggie. We still believe in helping folks who need it." As they waited for the tow truck, Jake leaned against his pickup while Maggie sat on her Honda's bumper. The afternoon heat shimmered off the asphalt, creating an oddly intimate bubble around them. "So what brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" Jake asked. "Most people are trying to leave small towns, not move to them." Maggie considered her carefully prepared story. "I was a nurse for 15 years, loved helping people. But..." She touched her lower back gingerly. "Herniated disc finally got the better of me. Disability retirement at 32 wasn't exactly the plan." Jake's expression grew more sympathetic. "I'm sorry. That's got to be tough, losing something you love doing." The genuine compassion in his voice caught her off guard. Sometimes life just changes everything in ways you never expected. "You know?" "Yeah." Jake's voice grew quiet. "I do know." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. The lines around his eyes weren't just from sun and hard work. They spoke of grief that ran bone deep. Murphy's tow service rumbled up the highway, breaking the moment. Jake stood and waved the driver over. Murphy Jenkins climbed out, a weathered man with kind eyes. "Well, Jake Morrison, what we got here? Radiator's gone on Miss Sullivan's car." Jake gestured toward Maggie. "She's new in town, might need some honest work done." Murphy nodded approvingly. "Bring her on into the shop. Won't charge you for the tow since you're practically neighbors now." As Murphy hooked up her car, Jake pulled out a scrap of paper and scribbled something down. "This is Ruth's number. Tell her Jake Morrison sent you. She'll take good care of you." Their fingers brushed as she took the paper, and Maggie felt an unexpected spark of electricity. "Thank you. Really, I don't know how to repay such kindness." Jake shrugged, but his cheeks reddened slightly. "No need. Just, well, welcome to Millbrook, Maggie Sullivan. Hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." As he drove away, Maggie watched his pickup disappear down Route 40. For the first time in years, Victoria Hamilton felt genuinely grateful to a stranger who expected nothing in return. Perhaps this crazy plan might actually work. She climbed into Murphy's tow truck, her Honda trailing behind like a wounded bird. Through the dusty windshield, the town of Millbrook appeared ahead, a collection of modest buildings that looked nothing like the corporate towers of Nashville. Ruth Washington's number was written in strong, careful handwriting. Somehow, holding that small piece of paper felt like holding a lifeline to something she'd never experienced before. A life where people helped each other simply because it was right. The Millbrook Diner occupied a narrow corner building with windows that had seen better decades and vinyl booths that told stories through their cracks and patches. Maggie slid into a booth near the back, studying the laminated menu while trying to calm her racing heart. Yesterday's encounter with Jake Morrison had left her more rattled than she'd expected. Not just his unexpected kindness, though that had touched something deep inside her, but the way he'd looked at her. Really looked as if trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. The coffee arrived black and strong, served by a gray-haired woman whose name tag read, "Dolly. You're the new girl Jake Morrison helped yesterday, aren't you? Word travels fast in small towns. That's me, Maggie Sullivan." Dolly's smile was warm but assessing. "Jake doesn't usually go out of his way for strangers. You must have made quite an impression." Before Maggie could respond, the diner's bell chimed. Jake entered with a boy who had to be Tommy, dark hair like his uncle's, but eyes that still held childhood's brightness, despite whatever tragedy had brought them together. Uncle Jake. Tommy bounced toward their booth before Jake could stop him. "Is this the lady whose car broke down? The one you helped?" Jake's face flushed. "Tommy, don't bother Miss Sullivan while she's eating. I'm not eating yet." Maggie smiled at the boy. "And you must be Tommy. Your uncle mentioned you yesterday." Tommy beamed. "I'm 8 years old and I'm going to play football next year, and Uncle Jake says I'm getting real good at throwing spirals. Want to see?" Inside voice, "Buddy?" Jake gently guided Tommy toward a booth across the diner. "Sorry about that, miss." "Maggie? He's friendly with everybody. Don't apologize." Maggie felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. "He seems like a wonderful kid." Jake's expression softened. "He's the best thing in my life, makes everything else bearable." The weight behind those words made Maggie study his face more carefully. She'd grown up around people who guarded their emotions like trade secrets, but Jake's pain was written clearly in the lines around his eyes. Would you like to join me? Unless you'd rather eat alone with Tommy, of course." Jake hesitated, then nodded toward Tommy. "What do you say, sport? Want to have lunch with Miss Maggie?" Tommy practically launched himself into the booth beside her. "Can I sit here? Do you like football? Do you know how to make chocolate chip cookies? One question at a time. Tiger." Jake slid in across from them, and Maggie caught a whiff of motor oil and something else, soap with a hint of cedar. It was unexpectedly appealing. "I do like football, and I make decent cookies." Maggie found herself relaxing despite her nervousness. "What position do you want to play?" Tommy launched into a detailed explanation of football strategy that impressed her with its complexity. Jake listened with obvious pride, occasionally correcting minor details. "Nursing burned me out," she said when Tommy asked about her previous job. "Bad back, you know. Sometimes you just gotta start fresh somewhere new. Starting over." Jake's voice grew quiet. "Yeah, I understand that. Lost some people a few years back. Had to figure out how to build a different kind of life." The careful way he phrased it told her this was painful territory. "I'm sorry to hear that. Must be incredibly tough raising Tommy alone." Jake reached over and ruffled Tommy's hair. "He makes it easy. Kid's got more courage than most adults I know." Tommy grinned through a mouthful of grilled cheese. "Uncle Jake says I'm brave like my mama was." The brief shadow that crossed Jake's face told Maggie she was hearing about the tragedy that had reshaped their lives. "Yes, you are, buddy," just like she was. Dolly refilled their coffee cups, and the comfortable silence that followed felt natural rather than awkward. Maggie watched Jake help Tommy with his sandwich, noting the gentle patience in every gesture. "So what kind of nursing did you do?" Jake asked eventually. "General practice. Mostly." She'd researched enough to sound credible, loved helping people heal, you know. There's something special about being part of someone's recovery. That's beautiful work. Jake's respect was genuine. World needs more people willing to take care of others. "What about you? What did you do before?" She gestured vaguely, not wanting to pry into whatever had brought him to Millbrook. "I was a lawyer. Personal injury, mostly. Helped regular folks fight big corporations when they got hurt or cheated." Tommy looked up proudly. Uncle Jake helped people who couldn't help themselves. That must have been fulfilling work. Maggie's chest tightened as she realized how close they were skirting to dangerous territory. "What made you stop?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes the system fails people, good people, kids. After a while, it gets hard to keep believing you can make a real difference." The bitterness in his voice made her stomach clench. She wanted to ask more, but something in his expression warned her away from pushing. "Well, you're making a difference now." She nodded toward Tommy, raising him, being there for him. That matters more than any courtroom victory. Jake's smile was genuinely grateful. "Thanks for saying that. Some days it's hard to tell if I'm doing right by him." "You are." The certainty in her own voice surprised her. "Anyone can see how much you love each other." When they finally left the diner, Tommy hugged her goodbye with the unself-conscious affection of childhood. "See you later, Miss Maggie. You should come to our house for dinner sometime." Jake looked embarrassed. "Tommy, you can't invite people over without asking first." But Maggie found herself hoping the invitation might stand. "I'd like that very much, Tommy. If it's okay with your uncle, of course." The way Jake's face lit up told her it was more than okay. It was exactly what he'd been hoping she'd say. Paradise Pines Trailer Park stretched along a tree-lined road that had seen better decades, but maintained a dignity that surprised Victoria. The trailers were older but well-maintained, with small gardens and careful landscaping that spoke of residents who took pride in their homes, despite modest circumstances. Ruth Washington emerged from the park office like someone who'd been expecting her for hours rather than minutes. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes that seemed to see everything while judging nothing. "You must be Maggie Sullivan. Jake Morrison called about you yesterday." "That's me." Maggie climbed out of Murphy's loaner car, grateful her Honda was finally getting the attention it needed. "Thank you for making time to see me." Ruth's assessment was thorough but kind. "Jake said you're looking for a fresh start, running from something or running toward something." The directness of the question caught Maggie off guard. "Honestly, a little of both, I suppose." Ruth nodded approvingly. "Good answer. People who can't admit they're running usually haven't figured out where they're going yet." She led Maggie down a gravel path lined with flowering bushes. The available trailer sat at the end of a quiet row, shaded by mature oak trees that had clearly been there long before the park. Unit 12's not much to look at from outside, but it's clean, and the previous tenant kept it nice. Ruth produced a key from her pocket. Rent's $400 a month, utilities included. First month and deposit up front. Maggie nodded, trying not to think about how $400 was less than she usually spent on lunch in Nashville. That sounds perfect. Ruth unlocked the door and stepped inside. The trailer was small but immaculate, with basic furniture and appliances that were clearly well cared for despite their age. Kitchens fully functional, bathrooms clean, bedrooms cozy. Ruth gestured around the space with obvious pride. Mrs. Peterson lived here for 6 years before moving to be with her daughter in Memphis. She left the furniture because she said it belonged here. It's wonderful. Maggie found herself genuinely moved by the simple comfort of the space. Everything I need. Ruth's eyes sharpened slightly. You're not what I expected when Jake called. What do you mean? Ruth walked to the window and adjusted the curtains. Most folks who end up in trailer parks are running from bill collectors or bad marriages. You've got expensive dental work and your hands are softer than a baby's backside. Maggie felt her cheeks burn. I had good insurance when I was nursing. Took care of myself when I could afford to. Ruth's expression was knowing, but not unkind. Whatever you're really running from, honey, it's none of my business as long as you pay your rent and don't cause trouble. But Jake Morrison's been through enough heartbreak for 3 lifetimes. If you're planning to break that man's heart, you might want to keep on driving. The protective love in Ruth's voice was unmistakable. I would never hurt Jake or Tommy. I promise you that. Ruth studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you mean that. Question is whether life's gonna let you keep that promise. As they completed the paperwork, a pickup truck pulled up outside. Through the window, Maggie saw Jake and Tommy climbing out, their arms full of boxes. Looks like you've got a welcoming committee. Ruth's smile was warm now. That boy of his has been talking about you non-stop since yesterday. Tommy burst through the door without knocking. Miss Maggie, we brought you moving boxes and Uncle Jake made sandwiches. Jake appeared in the doorway looking slightly embarrassed. Tommy insisted on helping. Hope that's okay. Of course it's okay. Maggie felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. You didn't have to do this. Jake shrugged, but his eyes were kind. Neighbors help neighbors. That's how it works around here. Ruth excused herself with a knowing smile, leaving the 3 of them to arrange Maggie's few possessions. Tommy chattered constantly, asking questions and offering unsolicited advice about where everything should go. You don't have very much stuff, Tommy observed, with the brutal honesty of childhood. Did you lose everything in a fire or something? Jake winced. Tommy, that's not polite to ask. It's okay. Maggie sat on the couch and pulled Tommy down beside her. I didn't lose my things in a fire. I just decided I didn't need most of them anymore. Sometimes having less stuff means having more freedom. Tommy considered this seriously, like when I gave away half my toys because I wanted room for my football equipment. Exactly like that. You're very wise, Tommy Morrison. The boy beamed, and Jake's expression grew soft as he watched them together. You're natural with kids. Must come from the nursing background. Something like that. Maggie felt a pang of guilt at the lie, but Tommy's trusting smile made it easy to push the feeling aside. When they finished unpacking, Jake hesitated at the door. Listen, Tommy wasn't wrong yesterday. About dinner, I mean, if you'd like to join us tomorrow night, nothing fancy, just burgers on the grill and whatever vegetables I can convince this guy to eat. Tommy jumped up and down. Say yes, please say yes. Uncle Jake makes the best burgers and I can show you my football trophies. Jake's hopeful expression was impossible to resist. I'd love that. Thank you for asking. After they left, Maggie sat in her tiny new home and tried to process what was happening to her. For the first time in her adult life, she was surrounded by people who wanted nothing from her except her company. Jake's kindness, Tommy's excitement, Ruth's protective warmth. It was everything she'd hoped to find and nothing she'd expected. Through the window, she could see Jake's house 3 trailers down. A modest double-wide with a neat lawn and a basketball hoop in the driveway. Tommy was already outside shooting baskets, his laughter carrying on the evening air. This was what normal felt like. This was what she'd been searching for without even knowing it had a name. Sunday evening in Jake Morrison's kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic, 2 scents that definitely shouldn't be coming from what was supposed to be a simple burger dinner. Maggie stood at his stove, completely absorbed in preparing what she'd casually described as just something simple. Jake leaned against the counter, watching her work with growing amazement. He'd expected hamburger helper and frozen vegetables. Instead, she was creating some kind of culinary masterpiece with ingredients she'd somehow produced from his basic pantry. Uncle Jake never makes food this fancy. Tommy sat at the kitchen table, chin propped on his hands as he watched Maggie work. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" "Oh, just picked it up here and there." Maggie's voice was carefully casual as she adjusted the heat under a pan of perfectly sautéed asparagus. "YouTube has great cooking videos." Jake raised an eyebrow. "YouTube taught you to make herb-crusted chicken and roasted vegetables with some kind of fancy sauce." Maggie's cheeks flushed pink. "I like to cook when I'm nervous. Keeps my hands busy." "You're nervous about having dinner with us?" Jake's voice was gentle, concerned, not nervous exactly. Just... She paused, searching for words. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal with a family in a very long time. I want it to be special." The wistfulness in her voice made Jake's chest tighten. She talked about her past, like someone who'd spent most of her life alone, despite mentioning parents and a nursing career. There were gaps in her story that didn't quite add up, but the loneliness was real enough. "Tommy's taken a real shine to you." Jake helped her carry dishes to the table. "Hope that's not overwhelming. He doesn't usually warm up to new people so quickly." "Are you kidding?" Maggie's smile was radiant as she looked toward Tommy, who was setting napkins with serious concentration. "He's the most wonderful kid I've ever met. You should be incredibly proud." "I am." Jake's voice carried the fierce protectiveness that always surfaced when anyone mentioned Tommy. "He's been through more than any child should have to handle, but he keeps finding reasons to smile every day." "What happened to his parents?" Maggie asked quietly. "If you don't mind me asking." Jake was silent for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Car accident 4 years ago. David was my younger brother. They were rushing Tommy to the emergency room and..." He stopped, unable to finish. "Oh, Jake, I'm so sorry. Tommy was in the hospital for 3 weeks. When he got out, I was all the family he had left." Jake's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he arranged silverware. "Some days I wonder if I'm enough for him." Maggie stopped what she was doing and turned to face him fully. "Jake Morrison, you listen to me. That little boy adores you. Anyone can see how safe and loved he feels. You're not just enough. You're exactly what he needs." The fierce certainty in her voice surprised them both. Jake found himself believing her in a way he hadn't allowed himself to believe anyone in 4 years. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Tommy bounded back into the kitchen. "Is dinner ready? It smells like a restaurant in here. Almost ready, sweetie." Maggie ruffled his hair, and Jake noticed how naturally the maternal gesture came to her. "Why don't you wash your hands while I finish the sauce?" During dinner, Tommy kept up a steady stream of conversation about school, football practice, and his plans for Halloween. Maggie listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was really paying attention. "My friend Marcus has the coolest costume planned. He's going to be a zombie football player." Tommy took a huge bite of chicken. "This is the best dinner ever, Miss Maggie. Will you teach Uncle Jake how to make it? I don't think your uncle needs cooking lessons from me." Maggie glanced at Jake with a smile. "But I'd be happy to cook with you sometime, if that's okay with him. More than okay." Jake realized he'd been watching her interact with Tommy with an intensity that bordered on hunger. She was so natural with him, so genuinely interested in everything he had to say. It was exactly what he'd always hoped to find for Tommy, and for himself, if he was being honest. After dinner, Tommy insisted on showing Maggie his room, complete with football trophies, model airplanes, and a collection of rocks that apparently all had very important stories. She listened to each explanation with the same attention she'd given his dinner conversation. Jake lingered in the doorway, watching them examine Tommy's latest art project from school. The domestic scene felt dangerously perfect, too good to trust, too precious to lose. "Miss Maggie, do you have any kids?" Tommy asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. Maggie's expression grew wistful. "No, sweetie. I never had children of my own." "How come?" Tommy settled beside her on his bed, completely comfortable with questions that would make most adults squirm. "Just never worked out that way. But spending time with you makes me think I would have loved being a mom." Jake's throat tightened at the genuine longing in her voice. When she looked up and caught his eye, something passed between them that was too complex for words. Later, as she prepared to leave, Tommy wrapped his arms around her waist in the unself-conscious way of children who know they're loved. "Will you come back soon? Can we do this every Sunday? If it's okay with your uncle?" Maggie looked questioningly at Jake, who nodded perhaps a little too eagerly. "Of course it's okay." Jake realized his voice sounded rougher than usual. "You're welcome here any time, Maggie, both of us. We'd like that very much." As he walked her to her car, the October air was crisp with the promise of winter. Stars were visible in the small-town darkness, something Jake had learned to appreciate after years of Nashville's light pollution. "Thank you for tonight." Maggie stopped beside her car, but made no move to get in. "For the dinner invitation, for letting me spend time with Tommy, for making me feel so welcome. Thank you for making it special." Jake found himself standing closer than he'd intended, close enough to smell her perfume, something expensive that didn't quite match her story about retiring from nursing. "You're good with him. Natural. He needs that kind of attention. What about you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "What do you need, Jake Morrison?" The direct question caught him off guard. For 4 years, his needs had been secondary to Tommy's. He'd almost forgotten he was allowed to want things for himself. Honestly, he met her eyes in the dim light. "I need to believe that good things can still happen, that maybe the worst is behind us now." Maggie's hand found his, warm and soft and steady. "I believe that too, for both of you." When she drove away, Jake stood in his driveway longer than necessary, watching her taillights disappear around the corner. For the first time since David's death, he found himself thinking about a future that included more than just survival. Inside, Tommy was already in his pajamas and brushing his teeth. "Uncle Jake, I really like Miss Maggie. She makes you smile different than you usually do." "Different how?" Jake helped Tommy rinse and spit. "Happier different. Like maybe you're not sad all the time anymore, out of the mouths of babes." Jake tucked Tommy into bed, thinking about how perceptive children could be. Sometimes they saw things adults tried too hard to hide. "Can Miss Maggie be our friend forever?" Tommy asked sleepily. "I hope so, buddy." Jake turned out the light, wishing he could make that promise with more certainty. "I really hope so." Main Street in Millbrook stretched exactly 4 blocks from the Methodist Church to Murphy's Auto Repair, lined with businesses that had weathered decades of economic uncertainty through stubborn determination and community loyalty. Maggie walked beside Jake, matching his unhurried pace, while Tommy ran ahead to peer into store windows. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between buildings that seemed frozen in the 1980s, their facades telling stories of better times and harder ones. Jake pointed out landmarks with the casual pride of someone who'd found home in an unexpected place. "That's Peterson's Hardware. Old man, Peterson's been running it for 30 years. If he doesn't have what you need, you probably don't really need it." Maggie smiled at the genuine affection in his voice. "You sound like you love this town. Took me by surprise, but yeah." Jake glanced toward Tommy, who was now examining a bicycle in the window of Murphy's shop. "When we first came here, I was just looking for somewhere quiet to lick our wounds. Turns out Millbrook's the kind of place that doesn't let you stay wounded forever." "What do you mean?" Jake stopped walking and gestured toward the barbershop where two elderly men sat outside playing checkers. "See, Mr. Franklin there. Used to be the high school principal. When Tommy started having nightmares about the accident, Mr. Franklin just showed up one evening with a chess set. Said learning strategy would help Tommy's mind stay busy on the good stuff instead of the bad stuff. Did it work? Tommy hasn't had a nightmare in 6 months." Jake's voice carried quiet amazement. "In Nashville, nobody even knew our names. Here, people actually care what happens to their neighbors." They resumed walking, and Maggie found herself envying the sense of belonging she heard in his voice. Growing up wealthy had meant being surrounded by people who wanted something from her family. Genuine care without ulterior motives was as foreign to her as small-town life. "You were really a lawyer?" The question had been nagging at her since their first conversation. "What kind of cases did you handle?" "Personal injury, mostly." Jake's expression grew more serious. "Helped regular folks fight big corporations when they got hurt or cheated. Medical malpractice, product liability, that sort of thing." Maggie's stomach clenched. Medical malpractice, product liability. Those were exactly the kinds of cases that would involve pharmaceutical companies like Hamilton Industries. Must have been fulfilling work. Her voice sounded strained even to her own ears. "What made you stop?" Jake was quiet for several steps, his jaw tightening with old anger. "Had a case that, well, let's just say sometimes the system protects the wrong people. Big pharmaceutical company had a medication that was killing people, and they knew it. Buried the evidence, paid off the right folks, made sure the truth never saw daylight. The world seemed to tilt around Maggie. Big pharmaceutical company. Medication that was killing people." Her mouth went dry as terrible possibilities began forming in her mind. That must have been devastating. She managed to keep her voice steady. "Losing a case like that, we didn't lose the case." Jake's voice turned bitter. "We never got to have a case. The families involved, they all died before we could get to trial, every single one of them." Tommy came running back, interrupting the conversation before Maggie could process what Jake had just revealed. "Uncle Jake, can we get ice cream? Mrs. Patterson says the diner has chocolate chip cookie dough flavor today." Jake's expression immediately softened as he focused on Tommy. "Course we can, buddy. What do you say, Maggie? You up for some ice cream?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. Her mind was racing with horrifying calculations. 4 years ago, multiple deaths, pharmaceutical cover-up. Jake's moved to Millbrook after losing family members. The pieces were forming a picture she desperately didn't want to see. At the diner, Tommy chatted excitedly about his upcoming football practice while Jake ordered ice cream sundaes for all 3 of them. Maggie sat frozen, watching this good man who'd suffered unimaginable loss, knowing that her family's company might be responsible for his pain. "You okay?" Jake's concerned voice broke through her spiral of panic. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Just tired, I guess." The lie felt toxic in her mouth. This has been a big adjustment, starting over in a new place. Jake's hand covered hers on the table, warm and gentle. "It takes time, but you're not alone anymore, okay? Tommy and we're glad you're here." Tommy looked up from his sundae with chocolate chip-stained lips. "Yeah, you're like part of our family now, Miss Maggie." The innocent words hit her like physical blows. Family. These people who'd welcomed her with open hearts, who'd made her feel valued and loved for the first time in her life. She might have destroyed their actual family without even knowing it. "I need to use the restroom." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the diner floor. Excuse me for a minute. In the tiny bathroom, she gripped the sink and stared at her reflection. Victoria Hamilton, pharmaceutical heiress worth $3 billion, looked back at her with Maggie Sullivan's frightened eyes. She had to find out the truth. Had to know if Hamilton Industries was responsible for Jake's tragedy. And if they were, if her company had killed the people he'd loved most. The woman in the mirror had no answers. Only the terrible certainty that her perfectly constructed new life was about to come crashing down around her. When she returned to the table, Jake and Tommy were discussing football strategy with the intense seriousness of true fans. They included her in the conversation seamlessly, treating her like she belonged, like she was family. For the rest of the afternoon, she smiled and nodded and pretended her world wasn't ending. But inside, Victoria Hamilton was already planning how to uncover the truth about what her company might have done to the two people who'd given her the only real happiness she'd ever known. The Friday night lights of Millbrook High School cast everything in golden relief: the crowded bleachers, the marching band in their crisp uniforms, the excitement of a community gathered to cheer their young warriors. Maggie sat between Jake and Ruth Washington, trying to focus on Tommy's junior league game instead of the questions that had been tormenting her all week. Tommy took the field with 11 other 8-year-olds, their oversized shoulder pads making them look like tiny gladiators. The sight should have been purely joyful, but Maggie couldn't shake the image of another little girl who'd never gotten the chance to play sports, never gotten to grow up at all. Look at him go. Jake's voice was full of pride as Tommy caught a pass and ran it 6 yards before being tackled. Kids got natural instincts. Ruth leaned over with a knowing smile. Jake's been coaching that boy every evening after work. Never seen a man more devoted to giving a child every opportunity to succeed. Maggie watched Jake's face as he cheered Tommy's every move, and her heart broke a little more. This wonderful man who'd lost everything and still found ways to create joy for the nephew who'd become his son. What would happen to him when he learned the truth about who she really was? The crowd erupted as Tommy scored his first touchdown of the season. Jake jumped to his feet, whistling and shouting encouragement. Maggie found herself crying, partly from happiness for Tommy, partly from the crushing weight of her deception. "You okay, honey?" Ruth's voice was gentle but concerned. "You've seemed troubled all week, just emotional, I guess." Watching Jake and Tommy together, "It's beautiful." Ruth studied her with those sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. "Beautiful and complicated, I'd say. That boy's getting attached to you mighty quick. The words hit their target. Do you think that's a problem? Depends on what you're planning to do about it." Ruth's voice was carefully neutral. "Tommy's been through enough abandonment for one lifetime. If you're not planning to stick around, best to pull back now before he gets his heart set on you being permanent." On the field, Tommy was hugging his teammates after another successful play. His joy was infectious, drawing smiles from parents in the stands who didn't even know his name. He was exactly the kind of child who deserved every good thing life could offer. "I don't want to hurt him." Maggie's voice was barely above a whisper. "I care about both of them more than I've ever cared about anyone." "Then why do you look like you're planning to run away?" The question hung in the autumn air between them. Below on the field, Tommy was looking up into the stands, searching for their faces. When he spotted them, his whole face lit up, and he waved enthusiastically. Jake waved back, then glanced at Maggie with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "You see that? He's playing for you too now, having someone besides me cheering him on. It means everything to him. He means everything to me too." The truth of it surprised her with its intensity. The game ended with Millbrook's junior team victorious. Tommy ran toward them, still in his grass-stained uniform, his face glowing with excitement and accomplishment. "Did you see my touchdown? Did you see it?" He launched himself into Jake's arms, then turned to hug Maggie with equal enthusiasm. "Coach says I might make varsity when I get to high school. I saw every second of it." Maggie held him tight. memorizing the feeling of his small, strong body trusting her completely. You were absolutely amazing out there. As families began dispersing toward the parking lot, Jake caught Maggie's elbow gently. "Walk with me for a minute." They left Tommy comparing stats with his teammates and strolled toward the edge of the football field. The night air was crisp with the promise of winter, and the lights created pools of warmth in the gathering darkness. "You've seemed different this week." Jake's voice was careful, concerned, distant, maybe. "If I did something wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong." Maggie stopped walking and turned to face him. "You've been perfect. Both of you have been more welcoming and kind than I had any right to expect." "Then what is it?" Jake stepped closer, and she could see the worry in his eyes. "Talk to me, Maggie." The simple request nearly broke her resolve. She wanted desperately to tell him everything, who she really was, why she'd come to Millbrook, the terrible suspicions that were eating her alive. But the words wouldn't come. I'm not used to this, being part of something real. Having people who care what happens to me." Jake's expression softened. "Hey," he reached up and touched her face gently. "You're nothing like what I expected when I decided to start over here." "What do you mean?" "When David and Lisa died, when I lost everyone who mattered to me except Tommy. I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd spend the rest of my life just trying to be good enough for him, never finding anything else worth caring about." "Jake." She could barely breathe, but then you showed up with your broken-down car and your nervous smile, and suddenly, he paused, searching for words. "Suddenly, I remembered what it felt like to hope for something more than just getting through each day." The honesty in his voice was devastating. This was the moment when a good person would tell the truth, would confess everything before it went any further. Instead, she kissed him. It was desperate and tender and full of all the words she couldn't say. Jake responded with surprise that quickly melted into something deeper, his arms coming around her like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. The football field lights created a private world around them, shutting out everything but this perfect, impossible moment. "Maggie." Jake's voice was rough with emotion. "I haven't felt this way about anyone since Sarah. That scares me. It scares me too, more than you know. But you're worth the risk." He traced her cheek with his thumb. "Both of us are worth the risk." From across the parking lot, Tommy's voice called out to them. "Uncle Jake, Miss Maggie, come see what Coach Miller gave me." They walked back hand in hand, and Maggie tried to memorize every detail, the way Jake's fingers felt intertwined with hers, the pride in Tommy's voice as he showed off his game MVP sticker, the sense of belonging that she'd searched for her entire life. Tomorrow she would begin investigating Hamilton Industries' connection to Jake's family tragedy. Tomorrow she would start down the path that would either free her from her guilt or destroy the only happiness she'd ever known. But tonight, under the Friday night lights of Millbrook, she allowed herself to believe that love might actually be enough to overcome anything, even the truth about who she really was. Sunday morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of Millbrook Community Church, painting rainbow patterns across worn wooden pews that had hosted 3 generations of the same families. Maggie sat between Jake and Tommy, trying to focus on Pastor William's sermon instead of the weight of secrets pressing against her chest. Tommy leaned against her side with the unconscious trust of a child who'd claimed her as family. His small hand rested on her arm, and she found herself memorizing the feeling, knowing that when the truth came out, she might never experience this simple acceptance again. Tommy needs stability. Jake's voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. Church gives him that foundation, even when I struggle with believing sometimes. Maggie glanced at his profile, noting the tension around his eyes. "I haven't been to service in years. It feels peaceful here." The hymn began, and Tommy's clear voice rose beside her, singing words about grace and forgiveness with the pure faith of childhood. Other voices joined in around them, Ruth's rich alto from the pew behind, elderly Mr. Franklin's wavering tenor, the Harris family harmonizing like they'd been practicing together forever. For a moment, Maggie forgot about Hamilton Industries and corporate cover-ups and pharmaceutical disasters. For a moment, she was simply part of something larger than herself, something built on hope instead of profit margins. When the service ended, Tommy tugged on her sleeve with excitement. "Miss Maggie, do you want to come to Sunday school with me? We're learning about David and Goliath." "Tommy, grown-ups don't usually go to children's Sunday school." Jake's voice was gentle but amused. "But she could if she wanted to, right?" Tommy looked between them with the earnest hopefulness that made it impossible to disappoint him. "Mrs. Patterson says sometimes parents come to help with crafts." "I'd love to help with crafts." Maggie ruffled his hair, and her heart clenched at his delighted grin. "If Mrs. Patterson doesn't mind, of course." In the Sunday school classroom, Maggie found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor with 8 children under 10, helping them create paper slings for their David costumes. Tommy worked beside her with intense concentration, his tongue sticking out slightly as he tried to tie knots. "Miss Maggie," Tommy whispered conspiratorially, "do you think David was scared when he had to fight the giant? I think he must have been terrified." Maggie kept her voice equally quiet. "But sometimes we have to do the right thing even when we're scared." Tommy nodded solemnly. "Like when Uncle Jake had to take care of me after Mama and Daddy went to heaven. He was probably scared, but he did it anyway because it was right." The innocent observation hit Maggie like a physical blow. She looked across the room to where Jake was helping another child with their craft, his patience infinite as he guided small hands through complicated tasks. "Do you think Mama and Daddy can see me from heaven, Miss Maggie?" Tommy's question was asked with the matter-of-fact curiosity children brought to life's biggest mysteries. "I think they can see how brave and kind and smart you are." Maggie touched his cheek gently. "And I think they're incredibly proud of the young man you're becoming." Tommy beamed, then leaned closer with another whisper. "Do you think they like you too? Because I told them about you in my prayers last night." The simple statement nearly broke her composure completely. "What did you tell them?" "That you make Uncle Jake smile the way he used to before everything got sad, and that you're teaching me to cook fancy food and you never get mad when I ask too many questions." Jake appeared beside them, having overheard the last part of the conversation. "What's this about too many questions?" Tommy giggled. "I was telling Miss Maggie how I pray about her now." "Is that okay?" Jake's expression grew soft as he looked between them. "That's more than okay, buddy. I think that's exactly what prayers are for." After Sunday school, they walked to Jake's truck through the church parking lot where families lingered to chat and make plans for the week ahead. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter, but surrounded by the warmth of community acceptance, Maggie felt something she'd never experienced before. She felt like she belonged. "You're good with him." Jake opened the truck door for Tommy, then moved closer to Maggie. Like you understand how his mind works. He's easy to love." The truth of it surprised her with its simplicity. He asks real questions and listens to real answers. Most adults have forgotten how to do that. Jake studied her face with growing intensity. "You talk about him like you're already attached." "I am attached." The confession slipped out before she could stop it. "To both of you, if I'm being honest." Jake's smile was radiant. "Good. Because we're pretty attached to you too." During the drive back to Paradise Pines, Tommy chattered about Sunday school and his plans for the Halloween costume contest at school. Maggie listened with half her attention, while the other half wrestled with the knowledge that she would have to start investigating Hamilton Industries today. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent the morning in church learning about David facing Goliath, and now she had to face the giant her own family had created. the corporate machine that might have destroyed Jake's family. When they reached the trailer park, Jake walked her to her door with Tommy bouncing between them like an excited puppy. "What are you going to do for the rest of Sunday?" Tommy asked. "Do you want to play catch with us? Uncle Jake's teaching me curveballs." "I'd love to, but I have some research to catch up on." Maggie hated the lie, but she couldn't explain that she needed to spend the afternoon digging into her own company's potential crimes. "Maybe later this evening." Tommy nodded acceptingly, but Jake's expression grew concerned. "You sure you're okay? You've seemed worried about something lately, just adjusting to small-town life." Another lie, another small betrayal of the trust shining in his eyes. "Sometimes it takes a while to feel settled." Jake stepped closer, his voice dropping to the intimate tone that made her pulse quicken. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? Whatever's bothering you, you don't have to handle it alone anymore." The kindness in his offer nearly broke her resolve. This wonderful man was offering to help her solve the very problem that might destroy them both. If only she could tell him the truth. If only she could explain that she was falling in love with him, while simultaneously preparing to investigate whether her family had murdered his. "I know." She managed a smile that felt more natural than she'd expected. "Thank you for that. For everything. Really." After they left, Maggie sat in her small trailer with her laptop, staring at the Hamilton Industries website. Her father's company logo, a stylized H intertwined with a medical caduceus, looked different now. Instead of representing healing and innovation, it looked corporate and cold. She began with a simple search: Hamilton Industries lawsuits, pharmaceutical deaths, 2019-2021. The results made her stomach clench. Dozens of articles about Serenade, an anxiety medication that had been linked to sudden cardiac events in patients under 40. The lawsuits had been settled quickly and quietly, with sealed records and non-disclosure agreements that kept the victims' names out of the press. But one article mentioned location details that made her blood run cold. Multiple deaths in Nashville area families. Some victims included children who had been given the medication off-label for anxiety related to ADHD. Children like Emma Morrison. Children like Tommy, who had somehow survived when his parents and uncle's family hadn't. Maggie closed the laptop with shaking hands. She couldn't read any more today, couldn't face the possibility that her family's company had destroyed the two people who'd given her the only real happiness she'd ever known. Outside her window, she could see Jake's house where warm light spilled from the kitchen windows. Tommy's laughter carried on the evening air as Jake helped him with homework at their kitchen table. Tomorrow, she would dig deeper. Tomorrow, she would find out for certain whether Hamilton Industries had killed Jake's family. But tonight, she allowed herself to pretend that love might be enough to overcome any truth, no matter how devastating. The Millbrook Diner at 6:30 on a Monday morning hummed with the comfortable energy of a community gathering place. Coffee percolated in industrial-sized pots, bacon sizzled on the grill, and conversations flowed between tables like morning prayers of connection. Maggie tied her apron strings with hands that were finally steady after yesterday's research session. She'd applied for the waitress position on impulse, desperate for something to occupy her mind besides Hamilton Industries and pharmaceutical lawsuits. Dolly Martinez emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 plates of scrambled eggs and hash browns. She was a woman in her 50s, whose grey hair was pulled back in a practical bun and whose eyes missed nothing. First-day nerves. Dolly set the plates down at table 4 and returned to study Maggie with maternal concern. "Don't worry, honey. Most folks around here are patient with new girls learning the ropes. I hope so." Maggie smoothed her uniform, a simple blue dress with white collar that made her look nothing like the pharmaceutical heiress she actually was. "It's been a while since I worked this kind of job. Diner works hard on your feet, but it's honest." Dolly handed her an order pad and pen. "Folks appreciate good service and fair treatment. Give them both and they'll take care of you. The morning rush began immediately, farmers stopping for coffee before heading to their fields. Construction workers grabbing breakfast sandwiches, retired couples sharing newspapers over pancakes and orange juice. Maggie threw herself into the work with surprising enthusiasm, taking orders, refilling coffee cups, remembering who wanted extra butter and who needed their eggs over easy instead of scrambled. The physical demands were unlike anything she'd experienced, but there was something deeply satisfying about earning tips through genuine effort. Around 9 o'clock, Jake entered with Tommy in tow, heading to their usual booth by the window. Tommy waved enthusiastically when he spotted her. "Miss Maggie, you're working here now? That's so cool." Jake looked surprised but pleased. "When did this happen?" "I started this morning." Maggie refilled their coffee cups. Jake's black, Tommy's chocolate milk. "Dolly's teaching me the ropes." "This is awesome." Tommy bounced in his seat. "Now we can see you every morning before school." Jake's smile was warm and proud. "I love this. You working here, building something for yourself." The simple approval in his voice meant more than any corporate board's praise ever had. "It feels good, really good. Like I'm actually contributing something instead of just existing." "You've always contributed." Jake's voice grew serious. "To me, to Tommy, you don't need a job to prove your worth." "But I need it for myself." Maggie realized the truth of it as she spoke. "I've never earned my own way before, never had to depend on my own skills and efforts. It's scary but empowering." Throughout the morning, she watched Jake help Tommy with math homework while they shared blueberry pancakes. The domestic scene filled her with longing and guilt in equal measure. This beautiful, uncomplicated morning routine, how would it survive when Jake learned who she really was? By lunch, Maggie had settled into the diner's rhythm. She'd memorized which customers liked their coffee refilled constantly and which preferred to be left alone with their newspapers. Mrs. Henderson complimented her biscuit recommendations. Mr. Franklin left a generous tip with a note saying she reminded him of his granddaughter. Around 2 o'clock, during the afternoon lull, Dolly sat beside her at the counter with 2 glasses of sweet tea. "You're a natural at this." Dolly's praise was genuine. "Most new girls take weeks to learn the regulars' preferences. You picked it up in one morning." "I like people." Maggie realized it was true. "I like listening to their stories, remembering what makes them happy. That's the secret to good waitressing." Dolly studied her with curious eyes. "You sure you've never worked food service before? You handle the chaos like someone with experience. Just adaptable, I guess." Maggie felt the familiar knot of anxiety that came with maintaining her cover story. People skills from nursing, maybe. Dolly's tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she didn't push. "Well, whatever background you've got, you're welcome here as long as you want to stay." Late in the afternoon, Jake returned alone, sliding into the booth where he and Tommy had eaten breakfast hours earlier. "Where's Tommy?" Maggie refilled his coffee cup automatically. "Football practice. I've got about an hour to kill before picking him up." Jake gestured to the seat across from him. "Take a break with me." Maggie glanced around the nearly empty diner, then slid into the booth. Her feet were aching and her back was sore, but she felt more accomplished than she had after closing multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical deals. "How was your first day?" Jake's concern was genuine. "Harder than I expected, but in a good way." Maggie flexed her tired fingers. "I forgot how satisfying it feels to earn money through honest work." Jake's eyebrows rose slightly. "You talk like you haven't worked in a long time." "Well, nursing was different. More clinical, I suppose. Less personal interaction." The lie tasted bitter, but Jake nodded acceptingly. "This suits you better then. You're happier today than I've seen you since we met, am I?" Maggie considered this. "I suppose I am." "It shows." Jake reached across the table and took her hand. "You're glowing with, I don't know what to call it, purpose, maybe." His touch sent familiar electricity up her arm, but today it was accompanied by something deeper. Pride in herself, in work well done, in building something real. Tommy's going to be so excited that you work here now. Jake's voice grew soft. He talks about you constantly, about how you're teaching him to cook fancy dinners and helping with his math homework and listening to his stories about school. He's easy to love. Maggie felt her chest tighten with familiar emotion. Both of you are. Jake's expression grew intense. Maggie, what we talked about yesterday, about being attached to each other. Yes, I need you to know that Tommy's never connected with anyone the way he's connected with you, not since his parents died. If this thing between us doesn't work out, it's going to work out. The words surprised her with their certainty. Whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere, Jake. Tommy's stuck with me now, whether he likes it or not. Jake's smile was radiant. And me? Am I stuck with you too? Especially you. Maggie squeezed his hand, wishing desperately that she could make that promise with a clear conscience. When her shift ended, Maggie walked home through Paradise Pines with $23 in tips and a sense of accomplishment she'd never experienced in corporate boardrooms. Her feet hurt and her back ached, but she'd earned every dollar through genuine effort and human connection. At home, she opened her laptop again, forcing herself to continue researching Hamilton Industries and Serenity. But tonight, the investigation felt less like self-torture and more like necessary preparation for the conversation she would eventually have to have with Jake. She was building something real now, a life, a career, a relationship based on who she actually was, instead of what she'd inherited. When the truth came out, and it would come out, she wanted Jake to see that the person she'd become in Millbrook was genuine. Even if the name on her birth certificate was a lie, Maggie Sullivan's love for Jake and Tommy Morrison was the most authentic thing she'd ever felt. The storm arrived without warning, turning Millbrook's autumn evening into chaos of wind and driving rain that rattled windows and bent trees nearly horizontal. Maggie had just finished cleaning her dinner dishes when urgent knocking came at her trailer door. Jake stood on her small porch, soaked to the skin and holding Tommy's hand tightly. The 8-year-old was pressed against his uncle's side, eyes wide with fear as thunder crashed overhead, powers out all over town. Jake's voice was tight with concern. Tommy gets frightened during big storms, and our place is leaking something fierce. Mind if we wait it out here? Of course. Come in, both of you. Maggie ushered them inside, grabbing towels from her tiny linen closet. You're both soaked through. Tommy clung to Jake's hand as another lightning flash illuminated the trailer's small windows, followed immediately by thunder that seemed to shake the ground beneath them. It's okay, buddy. Jake's voice was soothing despite his own obvious tension. Remember what we talked about. Storms are just nature's way of washing everything clean, but what if the lightning hits us? Tommy's voice was small and scared. What if something bad happens like before? The phrase, like before, carried weight that made Maggie's stomach clench. She knelt to Tommy's eye level, her voice gentle and calm. You know what? I've got battery-powered lanterns and enough blankets to build the best fort in all of Tennessee. What do you say we make this storm into an adventure instead of something scary? Tommy looked uncertain, but intrigued. A fort. The best kind. A storm-watching fort with hot chocolate and stories and everything. Maggie began pulling cushions off her couch. But I need 2 brave assistants to help me build it. Think you and Uncle Jake are up for the job? For the next hour, they transformed her small living room into an elaborate blanket fort illuminated by battery lanterns. Tommy gradually relaxed as he got caught up in the construction project, his fear replaced by excitement about their cozy hideaway. Inside the fort, they sat close together on piled cushions, sharing mugs of hot chocolate while rain drummed against the trailer's roof. Tommy was curled between them, finally calm enough to enjoy the storm's drama from their safe shelter. This is way better than being scared. Tommy leaned against Maggie's side with complete trust. You make everything seem less scary, Miss Maggie. Jake's expression grew tender as he watched them together. "She's pretty amazing that way, isn't she?" As the storm intensified, Tommy gradually fell asleep against Maggie's shoulder, exhausted by fear and comforted by safety. She stroked his hair gently while Jake watched with an expression she couldn't quite read. He hasn't slept through a thunderstorm since the night David and Lisa died. Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. They were rushing him to the hospital during a storm just like this one. Maggie's blood went cold. Hospital. What happened to Tommy that night? Allergic reaction to some medication Lisa had given him for anxiety about starting school. Jake's voice grew distant with painful memory. Throat started closing up. Couldn't breathe. They were driving through the worst storm we'd seen in years when they lost control of the car. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Medication for anxiety, allergic reaction, emergency trip to hospital during storm. Jake's family hadn't just died from medication side effects. They died trying to save Tommy from the same medication that had already killed Sarah and Emma. Sarah was already in the hospital by then. Jake continued, unaware of the devastation his words were causing. She'd had the cardiac episode that morning after taking the same pills. Emma was unconscious in the pediatric ICU. Maggie felt the world tilt around her. The same medication had affected all of them. Sarah's heart attack, Emma's unconsciousness, Tommy's allergic reaction, and Jake's brother had died trying to get Tommy to the hospital for treatment. One medication, one pharmaceutical disaster. Jake's entire family destroyed in a single day. She started to speak, but he continued, as if he needed to tell the whole story. Tommy spent 3 weeks in the hospital. When he got out, I was all the family he had left. Jake's voice broke slightly. Some days I wonder if I'm enough for him, if I can give him everything he needs. Jake Morrison, you listen to me. Maggie's voice was fierce despite her internal turmoil. That little boy adores you. You've given him stability and love and the courage to build blanket forts during thunderstorms. You're not just enough. You're everything he needs. Jake looked at her with wonder. How do you always know exactly what to say? Because I can see how much you love each other, and because I love you both more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. The confession slipped out before she could stop it, raw with emotion and completely honest despite all her other deceptions. Jake's eyes filled with something that looked like hope mixed with desperate relief. Maggie, I love you too. More than I thought I'd ever be able to love anyone again. He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of promises they both wanted to keep. Around them, the storm raged on, but inside their makeshift fort with Tommy sleeping peacefully between them, Maggie felt safer than she'd ever felt in her life. When they finally broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. I know we haven't known each other very long, but this, what we have, it feels like something worth fighting for. It is worth fighting for. Maggie's voice was steady despite the chaos in her heart. All of it. You, Tommy, this family we're building together. They held each other while the storm slowly passed, and Maggie tried to memorize every detail of this perfect, impossible moment. Tomorrow, she would have to dig deeper into Hamilton Industries' connection to Serenity. Tomorrow, she would have to face the possibility that her family's company had destroyed Jake's entire world. But tonight, surrounded by blanket fort walls and the sound of Tommy's peaceful breathing, she allowed herself to believe that love really could conquer anything, even the truth about who she really was and what her family had done. Saturday morning at the Millbrook Farmers Market brought together the best of small-town community. Local growers displaying perfect vegetables, craft vendors selling handmade treasures, and families wandering between booths with the unhurried pace of people who had nowhere more important to be. Maggie walked beside Jake, matching his leisurely stride, while Tommy ran ahead to examine a display of pumpkins that were bigger than he was. The autumn air carried scents of apple cider and cinnamon donuts, and she found herself relaxing into the rhythm of weekend shopping with people she'd come to think of as family. "Folks are talking about us." Jake's voice held gentle amusement as he nodded toward Mrs. Henderson, who was whispering animatedly to Mrs. Patterson behind the honey stand. "Hope you're okay," being Millbrook's hot gossip topic. "What are they saying?" Maggie felt a flutter of anxiety. Small-town gossip could be dangerous for someone hiding her true identity. Nothing scandalous. Jake's hand found hers naturally as they walked. Just that Jake Morrison's finally found someone who makes him smile again, and that Tommy's taken a real shine to his new... Well, they're not sure what to call you yet. What would you call me? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Jake stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I'd call you the woman I'm falling in love with, the woman who's made me remember what it feels like to plan for a future instead of just surviving each day." The honest emotion in his voice made her chest tighten. "I never thought I'd want to plan a future with someone again either, but with you and Tommy, it feels possible." Uncle Jake, Miss Maggie. Tommy came running back from the pumpkin display with his arms full of small gourds. "Can we get these for decorating?" "Mrs. Morrison says they make the best jack-o'-lanterns." "Of course we can." Maggie ruffled his hair, then realized what he'd called her. "Mrs. Morrison. Who's Mrs. Morrison, sweetie?" Tommy looked confused. "You are? Aren't you gonna marry Uncle Jake and be my new mom?" Jake's face flushed red. "Tommy, you can't just assume people are getting married because they hold hands sometimes." "But Miss Maggie loves us and we love her, and that's what families do, right?" Tommy's 8-year-old logic was unassailable. They get married and stay together forever. Maggie felt tears prick her eyes at his innocent certainty. Out of the mouths of babes came truths that adults spent months dancing around. "What do you think about that, Miss Maggie?" Jake's voice was carefully casual, but she could see the hope in his eyes. "About staying with us forever. I think..." She looked between Jake's hopeful expression and Tommy's expectant face. "I think I can't imagine wanting to be anywhere else." Tommy cheered and threw his arms around both of them in an enthusiastic group hug that drew smiles from nearby market vendors. Several people called out congratulations, treating the engagement as a foregone conclusion, despite the fact that no formal proposal had actually occurred. As they continued shopping, Tommy chatted excitedly about wedding plans and whether Maggie would help him pick out a new suit for the ceremony. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Maggie found herself getting caught up in his vision of their future together. "We should have the wedding right here in town," Tommy announced, as they selected apples from the Morris family's orchard stand. "Pastor Williams can do the ceremony, and Mrs. Patterson can make her famous chocolate cake and everybody can come. Slow down there, sport." Jake's laughter was gentle but tinged with uncertainty. "We haven't exactly discussed timeline or details yet." Tommy looked between them with the impatience of youth. "What's to discuss? You love each other and I need a mom, and Miss Maggie needs a family. It's perfect." "It is perfect," Maggie agreed, her heart breaking at how simple and right it all seemed from Tommy's perspective. "You're absolutely right about that." They spent the rest of the morning playing the part of an engaged couple, accepting congratulations from townspeople who'd watched Jake struggle through 4 years of grief and were genuinely happy to see him finding love again. At the flower stand, Mrs. Chen insisted on giving Maggie a bouquet of fall roses for free. "For the bride-to-be," she said with a warm smile. "Jake Morrison deserves happiness, and you two look perfect together." During lunch at their favorite picnic table overlooking the town square, Tommy continued his wedding planning while Jake and Maggie exchanged glances that were equal parts amused and terrified. "Can we have a big cake?" Tommy asked, around a mouthful of grilled cheese sandwich. "And can we invite my whole class from school? We can have whatever kind of celebration makes you happy." Maggie reached over to wipe mustard from his chin. But remember, weddings take time to plan. We can't just have one tomorrow. How much time? Tommy's impatience was endearing. A week, maybe a little longer than that. Jake's voice was gentle. Planning a wedding is almost as much work as planning a birthday party, and you know how long we spend getting ready for those? Tommy considered this seriously, then nodded. Okay, but not too long. I want Miss Maggie to be my real mom before Christmas. The casual statement hit Maggie like a physical blow. Real mom. This wonderful child, who'd already lost both his biological parents and his aunt, was ready to claim her as permanent family. The trust and love in his voice were devastating. I'd be honored to be your mom, Tommy. The truth of it surprised her with its intensity. More honored than you could possibly know. Jake's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. When I said I was falling in love with you, he murmured quietly, I meant with all of this. The way you are with Tommy, the way you fit into our lives like you were always meant to be here, I feel the same way. Maggie squeezed back, wishing desperately that she could make this promise without the shadow of deception hanging over all of them. As they walked home through Paradise Pines, Tommy skipping ahead with his pumpkins and talking excitedly about Halloween costumes, Jake pulled Maggie aside at her trailer door. You know he's serious about this, right? Jake's expression was tender but concerned, about wanting you to be his mom. I mean, he's already started thinking of you as family. I'm serious about it too. Maggie met his eyes steadily. I love him like he's already my son, Jake, and I love you like you're the person I've been waiting my whole life to find. Jake's kiss was soft and full of promises about their shared future. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I know this is fast, but would you consider making it official? The engagement. I mean, not rushing into marriage, but letting people know we're committed to building something permanent together. Maggie's heart soared and broke simultaneously. Yes, of course, yes. They kissed again, sealing promises that felt as binding as any formal ceremony. Around them, Millbrook continued its peaceful Saturday afternoon routine, unaware that one of its newest residents was living a lie that would eventually destroy everything she'd just agreed to cherish forever. But for now, in this perfect moment with autumn sunlight warming their faces and Tommy's laughter echoing from Jake's front porch, Maggie allowed herself to believe that love really could overcome any obstacle. Even the truth about Hamilton Industries and what her family had done to his. The autumn afternoon was crisp and golden as Maggie and Jake sat on his front porch swing. Tommy sprawled on the wooden boards at their feet, working on homework, with the intense concentration of an 8-year-old who took his responsibilities seriously. The peaceful domestic scene should have filled Maggie with contentment, but instead, anxiety gnawed at her stomach like hunger pangs. For weeks, she'd been researching Hamilton Industries in secret, uncovering more details about the Serenity disaster that had destroyed Jake's family. Today, she'd finally worked up the courage to tell him the truth about who she really was. Jake, there's something I need to tell you about my past. Her voice came out more strained than she'd intended. Jake looked up from the woodworking magazine he'd been browsing, his expression immediately concerned. What's wrong? You sound like you're about to deliver bad news. Not bad, exactly, just complicated. Maggie twisted her hands in her lap, searching for words that would make this easier. There are things about my life before Millbrook that I haven't been completely honest about. Uncle Jake, what's 7 times 8? Tommy looked up from his math worksheet, completely oblivious to the tension building between the adults. 56, buddy. Jake's voice was patient despite his obvious worry about Maggie's confession. Remember, you can always skip count by 7s to figure it out. Tommy returned to his homework with satisfaction, leaving Jake free to focus on Maggie again. His brown eyes were kind but serious. Whatever it is, it doesn't change how I feel about you. Jake reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm and steady. "We've all got things we're running from, remember? I told you that the first day we met. But what if it's something that could hurt Tommy, hurt you?" Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. "What if it's something that changes everything between us?" Jake was quiet for a moment, studying her face with the careful attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. "Are you in some kind of trouble? Legal trouble?" "No, nothing like that." Maggie shook her head quickly. "It's more about who I really am, where I come from." Tommy finished his math problems and moved on to spelling words, his pencil scratching against paper as he practiced writing neighborhood and responsibility in careful third-grade cursive. "Maggie, look at me." Jake's voice was gentle but firm. "I don't care if you used to be married to the president, or if you're in witness protection, or if you robbed a bank in your previous life. You're here now. You're part of our family now. That's what matters." The unconditional acceptance in his voice made her guilt infinitely worse. If only he knew that her previous life involved running the company that had killed everyone he'd loved before Tommy. "I grew up very differently than I've led you to believe," she tried again, desperate to find a way to ease into the devastating truth. "My family, we had money, a lot of money." Jake's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained calm. "How much money are we talking about? Enough that I've never had to work before taking the job at the diner. Enough that buying a trailer in Paradise Pines is like you buying a cup of coffee." Jake absorbed this information without apparent shock. "That explains some things. The way you handle money, like it doesn't matter. The expensive watch you wear, those cooking skills that definitely didn't come from YouTube. You're not upset." Maggie was genuinely surprised by his calm reaction. "Why would I be upset?" Jake's voice held gentle amusement. "So you come from money, and you're slumming it with us regular folks for a while. As long as you're not planning to disappear back to your old life and leave Tommy heartbroken, I don't see the problem." The casual way he dismissed her wealth as unimportant made her love him even more, and made her impending confession even more devastating. If only it were that simple. If only the money were the only secret she was keeping. "It's not just about having money, Jake. It's about how my family made that money, about what our company does." Tommy looked up again, this time with excitement about his spelling success. "Miss Maggie, I got all my words right. Wanna see?" "I'd love to see," Maggie forced enthusiasm into her voice, grateful for another interruption that gave her more time to find the right words. "You're getting so good at cursive writing. Mrs. Peterson says I have the best handwriting in the whole third grade." Tommy beamed with pride. "Do you think my mama and daddy would be proud of me?" Jake's expression grew tender. "I know they would be incredibly proud. Sport. They loved watching you learn new things. I wish I could remember them better." Tommy's voice grew wistful. "Sometimes I dream about them. But when I wake up, I can't remember their faces very well anymore." The innocent sadness in his voice hit Maggie like a physical blow. This precious child whose parents had died because of her family's medication, and he was worried about forgetting their faces. "You know what?" Jake's voice was thick with emotion. "I think it's time we put together a proper photo album of your mom and dad, with stories about all the things they loved about you. Really." Tommy's face lit up. "With pictures of when I was little, all the pictures we have." Jake pulled Tommy onto his lap, and Maggie watched the two of them together, with her heart breaking. "And I'll tell you stories about how excited they were when you were born, and how your dad taught you to throw a football before you could even walk properly." As Jake and Tommy talked about photo albums and family memories, Maggie felt the weight of her deception become unbearable. These two beautiful people who'd welcomed her with open hearts, who'd made her feel like family. She was living a lie that would destroy them both when the truth came out. "I should go start dinner." She stood abruptly, needing space to breathe. "Tommy, you want to help me make those chocolate chip cookies we talked about?" "Yes." Tommy scrambled off Jake's lap with 8-year-old energy. Can we make the ones with extra chocolate chips? We can make them however you want. Maggie ruffled his hair, memorizing the feeling of his trust and affection. Jake caught her hand as she moved toward the steps. Maggie, we don't have to talk about your family's business right now. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together, okay? The kindness in his offer nearly broke her resolve. This wonderful man was offering to help her solve the very problem that might destroy their relationship. If only she could explain that her family's business was the reason his family was gone. Okay? She managed a smile that felt more genuine than expected. Together. As she and Tommy headed inside to bake cookies, Maggie realized she'd been given another reprieve. Jake's unconditional love had bought her more time to figure out how to tell him the truth without losing everything that mattered. But time was running out. Eventually, she would have to find the courage to confess that she was Victoria Hamilton, heiress to the company that had manufactured the Serenity that killed Sarah, Emma, David, and Lisa Morrison. Eventually, she would have to risk losing the only real family she'd ever known for the sake of honesty. Tonight, though, she would bake cookies with Tommy and pretend that love really could overcome any obstacle, even the truth about who she really was. December, snow dusted Millbrook's main street like powdered sugar on gingerbread, transforming the small town into a postcard-perfect Christmas scene. Maggie walked beside Jake through the holiday market, their breath creating small clouds in the crisp air, while Tommy darted between booths, examining handmade ornaments and local crafts. The past month had been a series of perfect moments. Thanksgiving dinner at Ruth's house, helping Tommy with his school Christmas pageant, lazy Sunday afternoons in Jake's living room planning their future together. The weight of her undisclosed identity had become a constant ache, but surrounded by the warmth of their makeshift family, it was easy to push the guilt aside. Tommy wants to know when we're getting married. Jake's voice held gentle amusement as he nodded toward the boy, who was currently explaining wedding logistics to Mrs. Patterson at the jewelry booth. Kid doesn't beat around the bush. What exactly is he telling her? Maggie felt a flutter of nervous laughter. That his new mom needs a proper ring and that Christmas would be the perfect time for Uncle Jake to make it official. Jake's cheeks reddened slightly. He's got it all planned out, apparently. Tommy bounced back toward them with the infectious excitement that had made him the favorite child of every adult in Millbrook. Miss Maggie. Mrs. Patterson says Mr. Patterson makes the most beautiful wedding rings in 3 counties. Wanna see? Before either adult could respond, Tommy was pulling Maggie toward the jewelry display where, indeed, several simple but elegant wedding sets sparkled under the market's string lights. This one would be perfect for you. Tommy pointed to a classic gold band with a modest diamond. It's not too fancy, but it's still really pretty, and Mr. Patterson says it means forever love. Jake appeared beside them, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and hope. Tommy, you can't just pick out engagement rings for people. Why not? Tommy looked genuinely confused. You love Miss Maggie, and she loves us. And that's what people do when they love each other. They get married. Mr. Patterson, a gentleman in his 70s, smiled at the family drama unfolding at his booth. The boy's got good taste. That set's been in my case for 2 years, waiting for the right couple. It's beautiful. Maggie's voice came out softer than she'd intended. The ring was exactly what she would have chosen for herself. Simple, elegant, meaningful, without being ostentatious. Jake studied her face carefully. Is it something you'd actually want? I mean, hypothetically speaking, hypothetically... Maggie met his eyes, seeing love and uncertainty and desperate hope all mixed together. Yes. Definitely yes. Tommy clapped his hands together. Does that mean you're getting engaged right now? Well, Jake looked around at the growing audience of townspeople who'd stopped to watch their impromptu romantic moment. This isn't exactly how I planned to do this. There's no wrong way to propose when it's real love, young man. Mrs. Chen from the flower stand had appeared with a bouquet of red roses. Some of the best engagements happen when hearts are ready, not when timing is perfect. Jake looked at Maggie with an expression of pure vulnerability. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone after losing Sarah. You've given me back the ability to imagine a future worth having. I love you too. Maggie felt tears starting despite her efforts to stay composed. You and Tommy. You're the family I never knew I was looking for. Tommy tugged on Jake's coat. Uncle Jake, you're supposed to get down on one knee. That's how it works in movies. The gathered crowd chuckled affectionately as Jake, his face now completely red, actually dropped to one knee in the middle of the Christmas market. He took Maggie's hands in his, and she could feel them trembling slightly. Maggie Sullivan, will you marry me? Will you be Tommy's mom and my wife and stay with us forever? The simple, heartfelt proposal was everything she'd ever dreamed of and everything she didn't deserve. Around them, the people of Millbrook watched with genuine joy as their mechanic found happiness after years of grief. Yes. The word came out as barely a whisper, then stronger. Yes, of course, yes. The market erupted in applause and congratulations. Mr. Patterson insisted they take the ring set as his engagement gift to the couple. Mrs. Chen's roses were pressed into Maggie's hands. Tommy threw himself at both of them in a hug that nearly knocked them all over. We're gonna be a real family now. Tommy's excitement was boundless. I'm gonna have a mom and Uncle Jake's gonna have a wife, and we can all live together forever and ever. Jake slipped the engagement ring onto Maggie's finger, and it fit perfectly. Looking down at the symbol of their commitment, she felt simultaneously the happiest and most terrified she'd ever been in her life. As they walked home through the snowy streets, Tommy running ahead to tell Ruth Washington the news, Jake pulled Maggie close against his side. No regrets. His voice was quiet, concerned. I know that wasn't the most romantic proposal in history. Are you kidding? Maggie looked up at him with genuine wonder. Being proposed to by the man I love, surrounded by people who've become family, with an 8-year-old as our wedding planner. It was perfect. Jake's smile was radiant. You really mean that? I've never meant anything more in my life. The truth of it surprised her with its intensity. This is exactly how I want to remember this moment forever. They spent the evening at Jake's kitchen table making wedding plans, while Tommy provided enthusiastic input about everything from cake flavors to honeymoon destinations. The domestic scene was everything Maggie had ever wanted: simple, loving, real. But as the night wore on and they discussed setting a date for spring, the weight of her deception grew heavier. She was planning a future with a man who still didn't know her real name. Making promises to a child who didn't know her family's company had killed his parents. Tomorrow, she would have to find a way to tell them the truth. She couldn't walk down the aisle as Maggie Sullivan when her real name was Victoria Hamilton. Couldn't promise to love and honor Jake Morrison when she hadn't been honest about the most basic facts of her identity. But tonight, wearing Jake's grandmother's engagement ring and listening to Tommy plan their wedding, with the serious intensity of an 8-year-old event coordinator, she allowed herself to believe that love might be strong enough to survive any truth, even the devastating one she was about to reveal. The black Escalade looked completely out of place parked outside the Millbrook Diner, its corporate gleam contrasting sharply with the pickup trucks and modest sedans that usually filled the gravel lot. Maggie was refilling coffee for the lunch crowd when she spotted it through the window, and her blood turned to ice water. Marcus Hamilton climbed out of the driver's seat, straightening his expensive suit and scanning the diner's humble exterior with obvious disdain. Her cousin had found her. Maggie's hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot, desperate to disappear into the kitchen before he spotted her. But Marcus had already pushed through the front door, bringing with him the cold efficiency of corporate Nashville. The diner fell quiet as conversations died and heads turned toward the obvious outsider. Marcus's gaze swept the room methodically until it landed on Maggie in her blue uniform and white apron, and his smile was sharp with triumph. "Victoria, this little game has gone on long enough." His voice carried clearly across the silent diner. "The board is asking questions, and I'm running out of creative explanations for your absence." Maggie felt the world tilt around her as every eye in the restaurant turned toward her with confusion and growing understanding. At their usual booth by the window, Jake and Tommy looked up from Tommy's homework with matching expressions of bewilderment. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "How did you find me? Please." Marcus's laugh was cold and corporate. "You think I couldn't track my own cousin, the woman who owns 47% of Hamilton Industries? Your little disappearing act was amusing for a while, but the pharmaceutical conference in Geneva is next week, and your presence is required." Jake stood slowly from his booth, his face pale with dawning realization. "Victoria?" His voice was rough with confusion. "Maggie, who's Victoria? What's he talking about?" Marcus turned toward Jake with predatory interest, taking in his work clothes and calloused hands. "And you must be the local entertainment that's been keeping our heiress occupied. How quaint." "Don't." Maggie's voice found strength through desperation. "Don't you dare talk to him like that." But the damage was done. Jake's expression shifted from confusion to devastating understanding as the pieces clicked into place. The expensive watch she couldn't explain, the perfect dental work Ruth had noticed, the cooking skills that definitely hadn't come from YouTube. Victoria Hamilton. Jake's voice was flat with shock. "You're Victoria Hamilton. Of Hamilton Industries, the pharmaceutical company." Tommy looked between the adults with growing anxiety. "The one that makes medicine." "Yes, sweet boy." Marcus's voice dripped with false kindness. "Your new mommy is worth approximately $3 billion. Quite a step up from trailer park life, wouldn't you say?" Jake's face went white, then red, then white again. "Hamilton Industries." He spoke the name like a curse. "Your family's company." "Jake, please let me explain." "No." His voice cut across hers with finality. "No more lies, Victoria. No more explanations. I know exactly what your company does." The diner was completely silent now, every patron watching the drama unfold with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car accident. Dolly stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, as her newest waitress's life imploded in front of the lunch crowd. "Uncle Jake, what's wrong?" Tommy's voice was small and scared. "Why are you mad at Miss Maggie?" Jake looked down at his nephew with eyes full of pain, so deep it was physically difficult to witness. "Because Miss Maggie isn't who she said she was, buddy. She's been lying to us this whole time. I haven't been lying about loving you both." Maggie's voice broke with desperation. "That's the only thing that matters. That's the only truth that counts. The only truth that counts." Jake's laugh was bitter and broken. "The only truth that counts is that your company murdered my family." The words hit the silent diner like a physical blow. Several patrons gasped audibly, and Mrs. Henderson pressed her hand to her mouth in shock. Marcus raised an eyebrow with interest. "Murdered? That's quite an accusation, Mr. Morrison. Jake Morrison. And it's not an accusation. It's a fact." Recognition dawned in Marcus's eyes, followed immediately by calculation. "Morrison. Wait, you're not the lawyer who was trying to build a case against Serenade 4 years ago, are you?" Jake's silence was answer enough. "Well, this is fascinating." Marcus looked between Jake and Maggie with obvious amusement. "My dear cousin has been playing house with the very man who tried to sue our company for wrongful death. How poetic." Tommy started crying then, loud, confused sobs that cut through the adult conversation like knife blades. "Uncle Jake, I don't understand. Why is everyone yelling?" Jake scooped Tommy into his arms, and the boy buried his face against his uncle's shoulder. "We're going home. Sport. Right now." "Jake, wait, please." Maggie reached toward them both, but Jake stepped back like her touch would burn him. "Don't." His voice was deadly quiet. "Don't you ever come near my nephew again. Don't you ever come near either of us again. Jake, I swear I didn't know about Serenade when it happened. I was in Switzerland. I don't care where you were." Jake's voice rose with fury and pain. "I don't care what your excuses are. Your family killed my wife. Your family killed my daughter. Your family killed my brother and his wife. And you've been lying to us for months." He turned toward the door, Tommy still crying in his arms, then stopped and looked back with an expression of absolute devastation. "The ring, take it off. I won't have you wearing my grandmother's ring while you're lying about who you are." Maggie's hands shook as she slipped the engagement ring from her finger and held it out to him. "Jake, please, don't let this end like this. It was already over the minute you decided to lie to us." Jake took the ring without touching her hand. "Goodbye, Victoria Hamilton." After they left, the diner remained silent, except for the sound of Maggie's quiet sobbing and the satisfied murmur of Marcus making phone calls to arrange their departure. She looked around at the faces of people who'd become family over the past months. Dolly's maternal disappointment, Mrs. Henderson's shocked betrayal, Mr. Franklin's gentle sadness. These people who'd welcomed her with open hearts now stared at her like she was a stranger, because that's exactly what she was. Marcus finished his calls and approached her with corporate efficiency. "The helicopter will be here in 30 minutes. I suggest you say your goodbyes quickly." Maggie stripped off her apron and name tag, leaving them on the counter where she'd worked so happily for months. Then she walked out of the Millbrook Diner as Victoria Hamilton, pharmaceutical heiress, leaving Maggie Sullivan behind forever. Through the window, she could see Jake's house where warm light had always welcomed her. Now the curtains were drawn tight, shutting her out of the only real happiness she'd ever known. She'd found love and lost it in the same devastating moment. And the worst part was knowing she'd brought this destruction on herself through months of necessary lies that had become comfortable deceptions. Marcus opened the Escalade's passenger door for her with mock courtesy. "Ready to return to the real world, cousin?" Maggie looked back at Millbrook one last time, memorizing the small-town streets where she'd learned what it felt like to be valued for who she was, instead of what she owned. "Yes," she said quietly, "I'm ready." But as they drove away from Paradise Pines Trailer Park, she knew she was lying again. She would never be ready to leave the only place that had ever felt like home. The silence in Jake's living room was deafening. Tommy sat on the couch where he'd spent countless evenings with Miss Maggie, his school backpack still slung over his shoulders, tears streaming down his face as he tried to understand why his world had just exploded. Jake paced in front of the fireplace like a caged animal, his hands clenched into fists as rage and heartbreak warred in his chest. Every surface in the room held memories of Maggie, the kitchen where she'd cooked elaborate meals, the coffee table where she'd helped Tommy with homework, the couch where they'd built blanket forts during thunderstorms. Uncle Jake, why did Miss Maggie have to leave? Tommy's voice was thick with confusion and loss. "I don't understand what happened." Jake stopped pacing and knelt in front of his nephew, taking the boy's small hands in his own. He owed Tommy honesty, even if the truth was devastating for both of them. "Remember how I told you about the medicine that made your mama and daddy and Aunt Sarah and Emma sick?" Tommy nodded miserably. "The bad medicine that made them go to heaven. Well, Miss Maggie's real name is Victoria, and her family owns the company that made that bad medicine." Jake's voice cracked as he spoke the words aloud for the first time. Tommy processed this information with the literal thinking of childhood. "So Miss Maggie's family made the medicine that killed my family. Yes, buddy, that's exactly right. But Miss Maggie didn't make the medicine herself, right?" Tommy's 8-year-old logic was painfully clear. She wasn't even there when Mama and Daddy died. Jake closed his eyes against the truth of Tommy's observation. "No, she wasn't there, but she lied to us, Tommy. She pretended to be someone else for months. She made us love her while she was lying about who she really was. Maybe she lied because she was scared we wouldn't like her if we knew. Tommy's voice was small but thoughtful. Sometimes I don't tell you things because I'm scared you'll be mad. This is different. Sport. Jake pulled Tommy onto his lap, needing the comfort of holding the only family he had left. Miss Maggie. Victoria. She knew how much we'd been hurt by her company, and she didn't tell us the truth. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing grief that was too complex for a child to fully understand. Are we never gonna see her again? Jake's throat closed with emotion. I don't think so, buddy. I don't think we can. But I love her. Tommy's voice broke completely. She was gonna be my new mama, and we were gonna be a real family. I know you love her. Jake held Tommy tighter, his own tears finally spilling over. I love her too. That's what makes this hurt so much. Ruth Washington appeared at their front door then, letting herself in without knocking, as she'd been doing for 4 years. Her face was etched with concern and maternal protectiveness. How are my boys holding up? She settled into the chair across from them, her presence immediately comforting. We're not okay, Ruth. Jake's honesty was raw and complete. I don't know how to explain to Tommy that the woman who was going to be his mother is actually the heiress to the company that killed his parents. Ruth's voice was gentle but matter-of-fact. I heard about what happened at the diner. News travels fast in a small town. Did you know? Jake looked at her with desperate hope that someone else had been deceived too. Did you suspect she wasn't who she claimed to be? Ruth was quiet for a moment. I knew she was running from something big, expensive dental work, soft hands, the way she handled money like it didn't matter, but I never imagined this. She was so good with Tommy. Jake's voice was thick with conflicted emotion, so natural, so loving. How do you fake that kind of care for months? Maybe she wasn't faking the love part. Ruth's observation was careful but pointed. Maybe she was lying about her name and her background, but maybe her feelings for both of you were completely real. Tommy looked up with sudden hope. You think Miss Maggie really loved us? Ruth met Tommy's eyes with gentle honesty. Honey, I watched that woman with you and your uncle for months. The way she looked at both of you, the way she lit up when you walked into a room. That kind of love can't be faked. But she lied to us. Jake's voice was broken with confusion. For months, she lied about everything. She lied about her name and her money and her background. Ruth's voice carried the wisdom of 65 years of watching people make complicated choices. But did she lie about loving you? Did she lie about wanting to be Tommy's mother? Jake buried his face in Tommy's hair, overwhelmed by emotions too complex to sort through. Even if her love was real, how do we trust someone who could deceive us so completely? I don't know, baby. Ruth's voice was full of compassion. But I do know that people make mistakes when they're scared. And I know that throwing away real love because it came wrapped in lies might be a mistake too. Tommy pulled back to look at Jake with eyes that held wisdom beyond his years. Uncle Jake, when I broke your favorite coffee mug and didn't tell you for 3 days, you were mad at me for lying, but you still loved me, right? Of course I still loved you. Sport. That's completely different. Is it? Tommy's question was devastating in its simplicity. Miss Maggie broke something and was scared to tell us, but she still loved us the whole time, just like I still loved you when I was scared to tell you about the mug. Jake looked into Tommy's earnest face and felt something shift in his chest. The boy's 8-year-old understanding of love and forgiveness was cutting through Jake's adult complications with startling clarity. Maybe Ruth was right. Maybe Victoria Hamilton had lied about her identity, but told the truth about everything that actually mattered. The problem was, Jake didn't know if his heart could survive finding out. The penthouse office of Hamilton Industries occupied the entire 42nd floor of Nashville's newest skyscraper, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of a city Victoria had once loved. Now, surrounded by the cold efficiency of corporate power, she felt like a stranger in her own life. Marcus sat across from her at the mahogany conference table, spreading legal documents with the satisfied efficiency of someone who'd finally regained control of a situation. Board meeting minutes, pharmaceutical patents, quarterly profit reports, the empire she'd inherited and abandoned lay before her in neat piles of paperwork. "I want every file on the Serenade medication." Victoria's voice was steady despite the chaos in her heart. "Every single document that was hidden from me." Marcus looked up with mild interest. "Planning to reopen old wounds?" "Cousin, the Serenade matter was settled years ago. Sealed settlements, non-disclosure agreements, everyone satisfied with their compensation, everyone except the families who lost loved ones." Victoria's voice hardened with determination she'd learned in a small Tennessee town. "I want to know exactly what this company did and who covered it up." What this company did was develop a groundbreaking anxiety medication that helped thousands of patients. Marcus's tone was professionally dismissive. The unfortunate side effects in a small percentage of users were statistically acceptable losses. Statistically acceptable losses. Victoria repeated the phrase with disgust. "You mean dead children and grieving widowers were statistically acceptable to you?" "They were sealed settlements." Victoria, ancient history. Marcus's patience was clearly wearing thin. What's done is done, and dwelling on pharmaceutical disasters from 4 years ago serves no one. It serves the Morrison family. Victoria stood and walked to the windows, looking out over Nashville's sprawling landscape. Jake Morrison lost his wife, his daughter, his brother, his sister-in-law, and his nephew nearly died, all because of Serenade. "And I had no idea it had even happened. You were in Switzerland dealing with our parents' estate." Marcus waved dismissively. "I handled the situation appropriately, ensuring minimal damage to company reputation and shareholder value. You covered it up." Victoria turned back to face him, her voice deadly quiet. "You buried reports, paid off officials, and made sure I never learned that our company had killed innocent people. I protected Hamilton Industries from a public relations disaster that would have cost us billions in lawsuits and destroyed consumer confidence." Marcus stood to match her confrontational posture. "That's exactly what a competent VP does when facing corporate crisis. What a competent VP does is inform the CEO about pharmaceutical disasters that kill patients." Victoria's voice rose with fury she'd been suppressing for days. "What you did was hide mass casualties to protect profit margins. Victoria, drop this crusade or you'll lose everything you have left." Marcus's threat was delivered with corporate coldness. "The board is already questioning your extended absence and erratic behavior. Push too hard on Serenade, and they'll declare you mentally unfit for leadership. Let them try." Victoria met his gaze with steel she'd learned from loving people who valued integrity over wealth. "I'm prepared to lose everything if that's what it takes to make this right." Marcus studied her with growing concern. "This small-town experiment has clearly affected your judgment. A few months playing house with ordinary people has made you forget who you actually are." "No." Victoria's voice carried absolute certainty. "Those few months taught me who I actually am, and it's not someone who values corporate profits over human lives." She spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing Serenade files that made her physically sick. Internal memos about cardiac risks in patients under 40, clinical trial data that had been suppressed, lists of families affected by adverse reactions, including detailed reports on the Morrison family deaths that Marcus had settled with sealed NDAs and hush money. Sarah Morrison, 29, cardiac arrest within 6 hours of first dose. Emma Morrison, 6 years old, respiratory failure after pediatric dosage for anxiety. David Morrison, 32, and Lisa Morrison, 30, killed in car accident while rushing their son Tommy to emergency room after severe allergic reaction to the same medication. 4 deaths in one family from a single pharmaceutical product, and Marcus had buried it all to protect Hamilton Industries' reputation. As evening fell over Nashville, Victoria made the hardest decision of her life. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for investigative journalist Sarah Chen at Channel 5 News. Miss Chen, this is Victoria Hamilton of Hamilton Industries. I have information about pharmaceutical cover-ups that I think the public needs to know. That night, she called Ruth Washington from her penthouse apartment, desperate for news about the only family that had ever mattered to her. "How are they?" Victoria's voice was thick with emotion. "How are Jake and Tommy? Broken, honey?" Ruth's voice was gentle but honest. "Tommy cries himself to sleep, asking when you're coming home. Jake's barely eating, barely speaking to anyone. I never meant for this to happen." Victoria pressed her hand to her chest, trying to ease the physical ache of missing them. "I was going to tell them the truth. I ran out of time." "Love doesn't run out of time, baby." Ruth's wisdom cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Fear runs out of time. Love finds a way. What if love isn't enough? What if I've destroyed everything that mattered by waiting too long to be honest? Then you fight for it." Ruth's voice carried the strength of someone who'd seen people overcome impossible obstacles. "You fight for it with everything you've got, because real love is worth fighting for." After hanging up, Victoria stood at her penthouse windows, looking out over the city lights of Nashville. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of exposing Hamilton Industries' cover-up of the Serenity disaster. She would sacrifice her inheritance, her family legacy, and her corporate empire to ensure that Jake's family received the justice they deserved. It wouldn't bring Sarah, Emma, David, and Lisa back. It wouldn't erase the months of deception that had wounded Jake's ability to trust. But it might prove that her love for him and Tommy was the one truth she'd never compromised, even when every other part of her identity had been a carefully constructed lie. The Hart Senate office building's hearing room buzzed with media attention as cameras focused on the witness table where Victoria Hamilton sat alone, facing a panel of senators who would determine whether Hamilton Industries had deliberately concealed pharmaceutical safety data from federal regulators. Victoria wore a simple black suit that made her look nothing like the pharmaceutical heiress who disappeared from Nashville society 6 months earlier. Her prepared testimony lay before her, but she knew she would speak from her heart rather than from carefully crafted corporate language. Senator Williams called the hearing to order, his voice carrying the gravity of proceedings that could reshape pharmaceutical oversight nationwide. "Ms. Hamilton, you are testifying today under oath regarding allegations that Hamilton Industries suppressed safety data related to the anxiety medication Serenity." "Yes, Senator." Victoria's voice was clear and steady. "I am here to provide testimony about corporate practices that I believe violated federal safety regulations and cost innocent lives. Please proceed with your opening statement." Victoria looked directly into the camera that would broadcast her words across the country, knowing that somewhere in Tennessee, Jake and Tommy might be watching. "My name is Victoria Hamilton, and I was the CEO of Hamilton Industries. I inherited control of the company 4 years ago, following my parents' deaths, but I have recently discovered that during the transition period, critical safety information about our Serenity medication was deliberately concealed from me, from federal regulators, and from the public." She paused, gathering strength for what came next. "Serenity caused fatal cardiac events in patients under 40. Including children who were prescribed the medication off-label for anxiety disorders. Instead of issuing immediate recalls and public safety warnings, company executives, led by my cousin Marcus Hamilton, chose to bury clinical trial data and settle wrongful death claims through sealed agreements that prevented families from sharing their stories. The hearing room was completely quiet except for the clicking of cameras capturing her confession. Among the families affected by Serenity were Jake Morrison, who lost his wife Sarah and daughter Emma to cardiac complications, and David Morrison, who died with his wife Lisa in a car accident while rushing their son Tommy to the hospital after the boy suffered a severe allergic reaction to the same medication. Victoria's voice broke slightly as she spoke the names of people she loved. I was unaware of these tragedies when they occurred because I was in Switzerland managing my parents' estate. But ignorance is not innocence, and as the person who inherited control of Hamilton Industries, I bear responsibility for my company's actions. Senator Martinez leaned forward with interest. Miss Hamilton, what specific steps are you taking to address these alleged cover-ups? Effective immediately, I am renouncing all claims to my Hamilton Industries inheritance. Victoria's words caused audible gasps throughout the hearing room. I am establishing the Morrison Family Foundation with the entirety of my personal wealth, approximately $3 billion, to provide compensation for all families affected by Serenade and to fund independent pharmaceutical safety research. The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming, but Victoria continued speaking over the noise. Additionally, I am calling for congressional investigation into pharmaceutical industry practices that prioritize profit margins over patient safety. No family should ever again suffer what the Morrison family endured, and no pharmaceutical executive should be allowed to hide safety data that could save lives. Senator Williams called for order as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed continuously. Miss Hamilton, you understand that you are essentially bankrupting yourself to fund this foundation? Senator, the Morrison family lost 4 people to our medication. Jake Morrison lost his wife, his child, his brother, and his sister-in-law because my company chose profits over human lives. $3 billion cannot bring those people back, but it can ensure that their deaths lead to changes that prevent future tragedies. Victoria looked directly into the camera again, speaking to an audience of one. Jake Morrison is the finest man I have ever known. His nephew Tommy is the most wonderful child I've ever had the privilege of loving. They welcomed me into their family when they believed I was a retired nurse named Maggie Sullivan, and they loved me not for what I owned, but for who I chose to be when I was with them. Her voice grew strong with conviction. I lied to them about my name and my background, but I never lied about loving them. Every moment of happiness I experienced in their home, every laugh I shared with Tommy, every kiss I shared with Jake, those were the most authentic experiences of my life. Victoria pulled out the engagement ring Jake had given her, holding it up to the cameras. This ring belonged to Jake's grandmother. He gave it to me when he proposed marriage in Millbrook's Christmas market, surrounded by people who had become family to me. I lost the right to wear it when my deception was exposed, but I want the world to know that the love it represents was genuine. She set the ring on the witness table, her final gesture of sacrifice and truth. No amount of money can undo the damage Hamilton Industries caused to the Morrison family. But if my testimony today leads to pharmaceutical reforms that save even one family from experiencing their tragedy, then losing everything I inherited will be worth it. The hearing room erupted as Victoria concluded her testimony, but she sat quietly amid the chaos, knowing that her real audience wasn't the senators or the media. Her real audience was a mechanic and an 8-year-old boy in Tennessee who deserved to know that Maggie Sullivan's love for them had been the only completely honest thing in her life. The January morning was bitter cold when Victoria's taxi pulled up to Paradise Pines trailer park, its wheels crunching over gravel that sparkled with frost. She paid the driver with bills from her wallet, all the money she had left in the world after renouncing her inheritance and establishing the Morrison Foundation. Unit 12 looked exactly the same as when she'd left it 3 months earlier, down to the small garden Tommy had helped her plant the previous autumn. The trailer that had once been a disguise now represented the only home she'd ever truly loved. Ruth Washington emerged from the park office before Victoria had even knocked, bundling her into a fierce hug that smelled of vanilla and wisdom. "About time you came home, baby girl." Ruth's voice was thick with emotion. These old bones have been worried sick about you. I saw the testimony on television. Victoria's voice was smaller than Ruth remembered. Did Jake and Tommy see it? Every word. Ruth guided her toward the office where warmth and coffee waited. Jake watched from the diner with half the town. Didn't say much afterward, but I could see him thinking, what about Tommy? How is he handling everything? That boy's been asking every day when Miss Maggie's coming home. Ruth's voice was gentle. Even after he understood who you really were, he never stopped loving you. Child's heart is more forgiving than most adults give kids credit for. Victoria sank into Ruth's familiar couch, overwhelmed by the simple comfort of being back where people knew her as Maggie Sullivan, rather than pharmaceutical heiress Victoria Hamilton. I gave up everything. Ruth, the company, the money, all of it. The only thing I kept was enough cash to rent the trailer for 6 months while I figure out what comes next. What comes next is you fighting for your family. Ruth's voice carried no-nonsense determination. Jake Morrison's a stubborn man, but he's not a fool. He knows the difference between a woman who lied about her name and a woman who lied about her heart. What if it's too late? What if I've lost them forever? Ruth reached over and took Victoria's hands in hers, warm and steady and real. Honey, that man loved you enough to propose marriage in front of the whole town. That boy loved you enough to plan your wedding down to the color of napkins. Love like that doesn't just disappear because of hurt feelings and wounded pride. Victoria spent the afternoon unpacking her single suitcase in the trailer that felt more like home than any mansion she'd ever inherited. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The small kitchen where she'd learned to cook for love instead of obligation, the living room where they'd built blanket forts during thunderstorms, the bedroom where she dreamed of a future with Jake and Tommy. Around 5 o'clock, as winter darkness settled over Millbrook, a small knock came at her door. Victoria opened it to find Tommy Morrison standing on her small porch, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets and his breath creating small clouds in the cold air. "Hi, Miss Maggie." His voice was carefully polite, like he wasn't sure what to call her anymore. "Hi, sweetheart." Victoria knelt to his eye level, her heart breaking at the careful distance in his expression. "How are you doing?" "Okay, I guess." Tommy shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Uncle Jake doesn't know I'm here. He's at Murphy's fixing Mrs. Patterson's car." "Tommy, you shouldn't have walked over here alone in the dark. It's not safe. And Jake will be worried sick. I had to see if you were really back." Tommy's voice was small and uncertain. "Ruth said you came home, but I thought maybe she was just being nice." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes at his tentative hope. "I'm really back. I don't have anywhere else I'd rather be." Tommy studied her face with the serious intensity of childhood. "Are you still gonna be my mom, even though your real name isn't Miss Maggie?" "Oh, sweetie." Victoria reached for him, and he stepped into her arms with the trust that had never wavered. "My real name might be Victoria, but everything else about being your mom was completely real. I love you exactly the same, no matter what name I use." Tommy held her tight, and she could feel some of the tension leave his small body. "I missed you so much. Uncle Jake's been really sad since you left, but he won't talk about it. I missed you both more than you can possibly imagine." Victoria stroked his hair, memorizing the feeling of holding him again. "But Tommy, you need to go home before Jake realizes you're gone. He'll be frightened if he can't find you. Will you walk me home?" Tommy looked up at her hopefully. "Like you used to." Victoria hesitated, knowing that seeing her would likely devastate Jake all over again. But Tommy was 8 years old and walking alone in the dark, and his safety mattered more than her own emotional comfort. "Of course I'll walk you home." They walked hand in hand through Paradise Pines, Tommy chattering about school and football and all the things that had happened since she'd been gone. The domestic normalcy of it broke Victoria's heart and healed it simultaneously. At Jake's front door, Tommy hugged her one more time. "I'm really glad you're back, Miss Maggie. Even if Uncle Jake's still mad, I'm glad. I'm glad too, sweetheart. Victoria kissed the top of his head. Now go inside and get warm. And Tommy, don't sneak out to visit me anymore, okay? If you want to see me, ask Uncle Jake first. Tommy nodded seriously and disappeared inside, leaving Victoria standing on the porch where she'd spent so many happy evenings. Through the window, she could see Jake's living room where they'd planned their future together, and her chest ached with longing for what they'd lost. She turned to leave and nearly collided with Jake, who was standing at the bottom of his front steps with an expression she couldn't read. He came to see you. His voice was carefully neutral. He was worried I wasn't really back. Victoria met his eyes, noting the exhaustion and pain that lined his face. I walked him home because it was dark and cold, not because I wasn't trying to manipulate the situation. Jake nodded slowly. Thank you for making sure he got home safely. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy between them. I saw your testimony. Jake's voice was quiet. The whole town did. Victoria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. I needed people to know the truth about Hamilton Industries, about what happened to your family, about why I came to Millbrook in the first place. $3 billion. Jake's voice held wonder and confusion. You gave up everything. It was never really mine to begin with. Victoria's voice was steady. It was built on a foundation of buried safety reports and sealed settlements with grieving families. I couldn't keep money that came from covering up your family's deaths. Jake was quiet for so long, she thought he might not respond. Finally, he spoke. Why did you come back, Victoria? Because this is my home. Victoria's voice broke slightly. Because you and Tommy are my family, even if I don't deserve to be yours anymore. Because I love both of you more than I've ever loved anything. And I had to try to make things right. Jake looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. We need time, both of us, to figure out if what we had was real or just an illusion built on lies. I understand. Victoria felt her heart crack but forced herself to nod. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. As she walked back to her trailer through the cold Tennessee night, Victoria realized that coming home had been only the first step in a much longer journey. Earning back Jake's trust and rebuilding their relationship would require patience, honesty, and a kind of courage she was still learning to possess. But for the first time in months, she had hope that love might actually be strong enough to overcome the damage caused by necessary lies that had become comfortable deceptions. Tomorrow, she would begin the slow work of proving that Maggie Sullivan's heart had always been completely genuine, even when Victoria Hamilton's identity had been entirely constructed. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Millbrook Community Church, illuminating white roses and baby's breath, arranged with the simple elegance that perfectly matched the bride's transformed life. Victoria Hamilton, legally Maggie Sullivan now, having officially changed her name, stood before the mirror in the church's small bridal room, adjusting her grandmother's pearl necklace with hands that trembled slightly with joy rather than anxiety. Ruth Washington bustled around her, making final adjustments to the simple white dress they'd found at a boutique in Nashville. It was nothing like the elaborate gowns Victoria could once have afforded, but it was perfect for the woman she'd become. You ready for this, baby girl? Ruth's voice was warm with maternal pride. Ready to make it official? I've been ready for this moment since the day I met them. Victoria's voice was steady with absolute certainty. This is the happiest day of my life. The past year had been a journey of rebuilding trust, one conversation at a time. Jake had eventually agreed to family counseling with Pastor Williams, where they'd worked through the complex emotions of love, betrayal, forgiveness, and redemption. Tommy had been their bridge throughout the process, his 8-year-old wisdom cutting through adult complications with startling clarity. The Morrison Foundation had grown beyond Victoria's wildest hopes, funding pharmaceutical safety research and providing support for families affected by medication disasters. Jake had eventually joined the board of directors, his legal background proving invaluable in holding pharmaceutical companies accountable for patient safety. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and Tommy peeked around the door, wearing a miniature tuxedo that made him look impossibly grown up for a 9-year-old. "Miss Maggie, you look beautiful." His excitement was boundless. "Uncle Jake's gonna cry when he sees you." "Thank you, handsome boy." Victoria knelt carefully to avoid wrinkling her dress and straightened his bow tie. "Are you ready to walk me down the aisle?" They'd decided that Tommy should give Victoria away, since he'd been the one to bring them together in the first place. His pride in the responsibility had been evident during every wedding planning session. "I've been practicing walking slow, like you showed me." Tommy took her hand with serious concentration. "And I remembered the words I'm supposed to say when Pastor Williams asks, 'Who gives you to Uncle Jake?'" "What words are those?" Victoria asked, though she knew the answer. "I do. Because our family gives Miss Maggie to Uncle Jake with love and happiness forever." They'd written the words together, and Victoria had cried happy tears when Tommy recited them for the first time. The church organ began playing the processional music, and Victoria felt her heart swell with anticipation. Through the closed doors, she could hear the murmur of Millbrook's entire population, gathered to witness the wedding they'd been expecting since the previous Christmas market. "Ready, sweetheart." Ruth opened the doors to reveal the church filled with people who'd become genuine family over the past year and a half. Victoria took Tommy's arm and walked slowly down the aisle, smiling at faces that had welcomed her as Maggie Sullivan and continued loving her as Victoria Hamilton. Dolly from the diner wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. Mrs. Henderson blew her a kiss. Mr. Franklin gave her a thumbs up that made her laugh despite her emotional state. But her attention focused entirely on Jake, standing at the altar in his best suit with an expression of wonder that took her breath away. This wonderful man who taught her what real love looked like, who'd forgiven her deception and chosen to build a future based on the truth of their feelings rather than the lies of her identity. Who gives this woman to be married to this man? Pastor Williams asked the traditional question. Tommy straightened to his full height and spoke clearly. "I do. Because our family gives Miss Maggie to Uncle Jake with love and happiness forever." The congregation chuckled affectionately as Tommy handed Victoria's arm to Jake, then took his place in the front pew beside Ruth. "Dearly beloved." Pastor Williams began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and the journey that had brought Jake and Victoria to this moment. Victoria barely heard the traditional vows, too focused on Jake's face as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for the rest of their lives. When it came time for their personal vows, Jake spoke first. "Maggie, when I met you on Route 40 with your broken-down car and your nervous smile, I thought you were just someone who needed help. I had no idea you were someone who would save my life." His voice was thick with emotion. "You taught me that love doesn't have to end with loss. You showed Tommy what it means to have a mother who chooses to love him every single day. You've turned our house into a home and our survival into a real life worth living." Jake pulled out the engagement ring she'd worn briefly the year before, his grandmother's ring that had been reset with a new stone, purchased with his own money rather than inherited wealth. This ring represents the love we've built together, the truth we've learned to share, and the family we've chosen to become. I promise to love you as Maggie Sullivan, as Victoria Hamilton, as whoever you choose to be for the rest of our lives." Victoria was crying openly now as Jake slipped the ring onto her finger where it belonged. "Jake." Victoria's voice was clear despite her tears. "When I came to Millbrook, I was running from a life that felt empty despite being full of everything money could buy. I thought I was looking for someone who could love me for myself, but what I found was so much more. She looked toward Tommy, who was watching with rapt attention. I found a family that taught me what real wealth looks like. A man who showed me that love is about choosing each other every day, especially when it's difficult. A son who taught me that being a mother means loving someone enough to be completely honest with them, even when the truth is complicated. Victoria took Jake's hands in hers. I promise to love you with the same authenticity that you've always deserved. I promise to be Tommy's mother with the same dedication you've shown as his father. I promise to build our future on truth, trust, and the knowledge that what we have is worth fighting for. Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, and Jake's kiss was everything Victoria had dreamed of during the long months of rebuilding their relationship. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, decorated with flowers from Mrs. Jen's garden and food prepared by every family in Millbrook. Victoria danced with Jake to music, played by the high school band, surrounded by people who'd witnessed their entire love story. During the father-daughter dance, Tommy insisted on dancing with both his new parents at the same time, creating a three-person waltz that perfectly represented their unconventional but absolutely perfect family. As the evening wound down, Jake and Victoria stood outside the church under stars that seemed brighter than any she'd seen from penthouse windows. Tomorrow they would honeymoon at a cabin in the Smoky Mountains. Nothing elaborate, just time together as a newly official family. Any regrets? Jake asked, holding her close as winter wind rustled through bare tree branches. Victoria thought about the corporate empire she'd inherited and given away, the wealth she'd renounced, the pharmaceutical heiress identity she'd abandoned completely. Only one. She looked up at him with complete honesty. I regret that it took me so long to tell you the truth. I regret the months you spent loving someone who was lying about her name. Jake kissed her forehead gently. Maggie Sullivan never lied about loving us. That's the only truth that ever mattered. Inside the church, Tommy was helping Ruth clean up reception decorations with the serious responsibility of a 9-year-old who knew he was part of something important. Their family had been broken by pharmaceutical disasters and corporate cover-ups, then rebuilt through forgiveness, honesty, and the radical choice to love completely despite past hurts. Victoria Hamilton had been worth $3 billion. Maggie Sullivan Morrison was worth everything that actually mattered. The love of a good man, the trust of a wonderful child, and the knowledge that she'd finally found her way home to the life she was always meant to live. As they drove away from their wedding reception toward their new life together, Victoria realized that sometimes the greatest wealth came not from what you inherited, but from what you were brave enough to give away in service of love. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.